Hey, this is Zac.
And I'm Clint, and we wanted to thank Exo-terra for sponsoring this episode of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio.
Exo-terra is the industry leader in glass terrarium enclosures, and we are a big fan of getting to see the species we work with both at home and at the university.
We utilize Exo-terra caging here at Metazotics, and in addition to top quality terrariums, Exo-terra offers an array of heating options, lighting, supplements, decor, and truthfully anything needed or wanted when keeping reptiles.
Thank you, Exo-terra, for supporting Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. As always, Clint is here. How you doing, dude?
I'm doing fantastic, buddy. How you doing, Zac?
Hanging in there. Got back from Colubrid Fest and work. You know, reality smashed me in the head, and then I got sick. So my body couldn't take all the goodness of Colubrid Fest. It just gave up afterwards. So it's been a little ill, but that's fine. Otherwise, it's all good. It's just in the wildlife conservation world, a lot of reports and data and things like that are always due in October around the middle. This is always one of the roughest months of my year. And I got a lot of active grants right now in crayfish land. And for my wildlife people that listen, because I know we have a few, state wildlife action plans are due this month, which are called SWAPs. And when you're an endangered species yourself, the rare guy that was like, yeah, craw crabs, I'm going to dedicate my life to those. I have to help with a lot of those. And suddenly my inbox exploded with, hey, did you get those SWAP calculations done? Did you calculate those ranks, as we call them? And I was like, yeah, no, I didn't. So that's pretty much all I've been doing while sick. So lots of spreadsheets. You like your spreadsheets?
I was going to say, none of that sounded fun until you said spreadsheets. And I'm like, I can handle that. That's
yeah, you could have handled that. It was right up your alley. It is. I will say one thing. It's pretty cool because it's why I do what I do. And it's really neat to be able to like take that data from the field and what all my students have done and then have it actually like matter. It's interesting to be like, yeah, this thing needs protected. And at the same time, flip side, we thought this one needed protected, but this one doesn't need as much protection. And that's what this whole process is. But it's been it's been really interesting going from snakes to now it's crayfish. But you know, I'm not complaining. It's just incessant. That's all. So tonight is a very nice relaxation / reprieve from the spreadsheets. So, and I'll get it done. I'm not worried about that. But yeah, what's been going on over at Metazotics?
Been some good stuff, man. It's obviously been a hectic time in terms of shows.
Yeah.
I mean, I had the Lexington show. I think there was 1 week or two, skip a weekend, Colubrid Fest, which obviously we know how much effort and everything went into that. And then we had the Evansville show this past weekend. So 2 weekends in a row. And then Tinley is this coming weekend. And so there's been no rest for the wicked, at all. It's funny, though, because here Tinley is like the largest show that I go to every year, yet it's the easiest one for me to pack up for. Yeah. Because most shows I do, Metazotics has 3 tables and everything that goes along with that. And Colubrid Fest, you saw we had 4 tables. Yeah. But Tinley, I can only get 1. And so it's the easiest show to load up for because there's only so much you can put on 1 table. Yep. But that's going on. We have outside of the shop, it's the Fall Festival out here in Evansville. And just it's funny because when I say the Fall Festival, everyone thinks about their local fall festivals. But this one, it's debatable. Like there's an argument out there. It is either the 2nd or 3rd largest street festival in the country. Mardi Gras is the only one that I've found that's bigger, but there's an argument that there may be another one like in Dallas, but it's massive out here and it's a big deal. So took the boys and Addie, the whole family went down last night, and it's not only do you have all the games, all the rides, but you have 6 blocks of food booths lining both sides. And so it is. It is. and there's so many, and it's all nonprofits. Every booth is a nonprofit, but I mean, the kind of food that you find down there, it's insane, and you go home hurting, and it's you know you've walked so far, and you're still eating on the way back, and you're already full, but you see that thing that it's the only time of the year you're ever going to see it, so you eat it anyway. All the funnel cakes, I mean, you name it. But it was glorious and painful all at the same time. But I love it, and kids had a blast. So we have that going on, and we expected this week to be fairly slow in store. And today was the first day that we were open because we're closed on Mondays. Today's Tuesday, and no, it was really busy. But typically, all businesses in the city kind of slow down, all retail, because everybody's at the festival. But no, that's been good. I'll talk about a little bit more as far as business and the updates and what I'm seeing. But so today I was getting a few messages from Kevin Sheehan. He's a friend of the show, and Kevin had sent me a king rat a while back, a long time ago. Like within the past year, but I wasn't sure if it was male or female, and I didn't necessarily need it for breeding or anything this season because I already had everything paired and lined up and in swing. And so every few months, Kevin will ask me, "Have you sexed that king rat yet?" No. Oh. And so he messaged me today, and I thought, you know what? I need to just go do that and get it done. So I'm like, "Steve, meet me in the Asian rat snake room for some sexing." And he just kind of rolls his eyes and he goes, "Well, what am I grabbing?" I'm like, "I need you to hold a king rat snake for me." And so he's like, "I'm putting on gloves." I'm like, "Fine." So he comes in, he gets this king rat, and this thing's fighting, squirming, and it finally happened. I have now been musked by a king rat snake.
You were musked by the stinking goddess.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. And for those who don't know, their other name is the stinking goddess. And it took me like 15 minutes scrubbing my hands. I should have wore gloves. But it took me like 15 minutes scrubbing my hands to get that stink off. I walk out and I'm just going like onto the floor, and the Anna and Felicia, "What are you doing?" I'm like, I can't tell if it's still on me or if it's just in my nose. So, it was terrible, but it's a male, Kevin.
It's a male.
Okay.
Well, there you go.
I know what it is now. But that was fun. That was funny. We're getting down to the final. I think there's a clutch hatching back there, and I think we have two more. A ball python clutch and a sub-aught clutch, and then that's it for the season. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. But things, again, continue to be moving right along, and that's exciting for me. So
very cool. Well, we have an interesting update. One of our updates is Max is backstage, but now he's on the stage. So
this is Max, short for maximum effort.
There you go.
I don't remember that being on my
One of the things we're trying to do is these two middle-aged men who have no business doing anything technological are trying to upgrade our visual experience for those that watch this on YouTube. And if you've watched the first 3 episodes of us doing this, there were a couple that were painful. We got a little speedier, but now we kind of realize we need somebody on the backstage to bring up images and take images down and, basically do all that. And Max is going to help elevate CCR to the level we all wanted to get to. He's already doing that, by the way. So a lot of people met Max that went to Colubert Fest. And you've seen pictures, and we announced his presence, but we got Max here tonight. And one of the things we're trying to do is we're trying to build our community, because that's what we're all about. And once again, 2 middle-aged white guys have no business trying to do anything with Discord. And Max came to us early on and was like, "Hey, I want to build a Discord server for you all." And I know this is going to age me because my son uses Discord. and my students use Discord, that was something we needed to do. So
Mhm.
we have Max here tonight to talk about Discord because he told us what to say. And we were like, yeah, no, we're just going to bring you on stage. That was pretty much the way that went down. So anyway.
Well, today was a
So
momentous
take it away,
day.
Max.
Today was a momentous day because we actually had Clint join the server. I was thoroughly impressed when I got the email saying, I think I did it.
I think I'm in there. I said some stuff. We'll see.
Yeah. And then I was looking in the listings channel, and then I go, oh wait, now that Clint's here, I have to change him to an in-server breeder. And then I went, and then you posted everything today. And all of those listings are in the outside channel. And I was like,
all the morph market stuff. Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
Oh, yes. Well, I'm telling you what, saddle up, partner, because that's one thing I didn't mention. So over the past couple weeks, I haven't been updating Morph Market with new animals because there's been so many animals getting loaded into our system, but we have show after show after show that it's kind of pointless for me to do all the work of getting them loaded on Morph Market and on Show Me Marketplace because they may sell so fast. And, I'd rather let me get through the shows, then I'll get everything uploaded. So I think today I uploaded somewhere around 35, and I'm looking at the sheet right now. I still have 228 animals to add onto those sites on top of the 190, I think 180, 190. They're already on there.
Yeah.
So there'll be a lot more coming.
I think about halfway through, I posted, darn it, Clint, why are you doing this now?
I finally had 2 minutes.
Yeah. But, okay. Why don't you guys ask me some questions?
That's what I'm going to do right now. So if people that are, we have people right now, I guarantee you, they're like, what the hell is Discord? And then we have other people that are thinking like, oh, there's a Discord server that are pretty amped about it. So let's cater more to the people that, oh my God, there's a Discord server right now. If you have Discord, how do you get to our server?
So there is a website. It is called Disboard, DISBOARD. And it is kind of like a mini advertising platform for servers.
Okay.
If you go on there, the server is called Colubrid and Colubroid Powerhouse. We are not the only Colubrid and Colubroid server, so make sure you get the right one.
Okay.
There is, it's a very colorful snake. It's actually a Phrynonex, young Phrynonex, so it is very colorful. But other than the title, that's pretty much the only way to identify it. I want to update the listing, but they're having some troubles right now. So you can still join using that link. But also, there is a link on the Facebook post we made all that time ago.
There we go.
So I would check that out.
And then briefly, what's the goal of the server? So we have this server, but if why would people go to this server and join? What can you do there that you can't necessarily do on a Facebook group?
So it is a very specialized group of people. I gathered all of my friends that I have met on Discord throughout the years, a lot of whom are breeders and are good ones.
Mm-hmm.
So before this server was ever open to the public, I had a decent group of people in there that I trusted with the public's well-being.
Yep.
I said, okay, these people are good people. Now let's open it up to the public. And if people want to come in and ask questions and get their education here, now I feel comfortable doing so.
There you go.
So the server is kind of a place for community to gather, to learn, and to build upon that exact word, community. It's to kind of grow exactly what the show's been all about since the beginning.
Yeah, and not only is it a place for people who are new to come and learn, it's for people like yourselves, breeders, to come and show off their animals. We have channels for that too. We were talking about the morph market listings earlier. If you have a morph market page, I can hook you up and your listings automatically flow into a channel. Show
Very
off your
cool.
animals, talk about somebody with them, teach somebody something they didn't know. Who knows? Maybe you'll even make a sale. Just don't do it in the server, please.
Very cool.
There
Very
you go.
cool. And as we said before,
All right.
Max is also really assisting us with social media. The Facebook account. We're working on the Instagram to get it linked because that's still a fiasco.
Yeah.
Just a lot of things behind the scenes that Max is continuing to work with. There is, and I've not even said this to Zac yet. I know it's been mentioned, but I started to dabble to get it done. But there will be a website coming probably sooner rather than later. And really the reason we wanted to put that together was so we had a centralized place for all of everything we're talking about on CCR, and any information, just anything you're looking for, including, I know that we've had a lot of requests for t-shirts. We've got the shirts, but we have to have a way that's, yes, we've got them and they're nice. And we're looking for ways that our listeners who are interested in obtaining those, a quick and easy way to make that happen. And obviously, a site is needed to do that. So that's in the pipeline. That is going to be coming out eventually. And Max will be an integral part of that as well.
Yep. So with that being said, thanks for coming on, bud. But you're not going anywhere.
Now.
You're just going behind
the
curtain.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
There we go. All right. Thanks,
See
bud.
you, Max.
Yep. Okay. So I can do, you kind of did your updates there. The one update I want to throw out there is I am desperately trying to get all this stuff out of kind of push it aside so I can get cranking on this book. And I hinted at it a couple times. I just want to make sure I announce it because I'm happy about this. But I have a co-author on the book, and it's John Rice of Fathom Hogs. So just to be 100% certain that has been out there, John is tackling the morph section, and it's going to be badass. That's all I have. It's so refreshing compared to the last book I wrote, where I was like, oh, this morph stuff, I don't understand it. And John, not only does he understand it, he's literally made some of the morphs that are in the book. Like, you can't get any more worthy than that. So pretty certain this is going to end well. So, and the other thing about John is he's 90 minutes down the road from me. So it's really cool. I've sent my students over. They gather a lot of data from his collection for one of my kids' theses already. We hung out with him at Colubrid Fest a little bit. I didn't get to hang out with anybody. I felt really, I was just running around like a chicken with my head cut off the whole time. But I'll be giving updates on that here shortly in future episodes. So that's really my only big update. So do we want to move on to our
let's jump in it.
So science update, that's me. We have Rare Genetics Inc. that sponsors our science updates. We want to remind everybody, get those sheds to everybody there at RGI. They want to move on Colubrid stuff, and right now we're the main outlet for their material, so we're plugging away happy as we can. If you want instructions, just message me. If you message me directly, I will happily give you the instructions that Ben and Kayla gave us. It's really, really easy. And then you just ship those sheds down with a little bit of data, what the morph is, what the lineage is, what the sex is, or what you think all those things are. And then once they have that data, they can then go in and look for I think it's SNPs, if you're a biology nerd, to identify the given mutation, though I might be wrong on that. So, paper tonight. Our guest tonight is Michael Coone, and I am pumped because we're talking about two of my favorite North American colubrids. We never really talked about these before in the history of CCR, so that makes it even more special. We're going to do some Pituophis that are native to the Gulf Coast, and if you are listening, you know what those are. So we have the Louisiana pine snake, which is Pituophis ruthveni, and the black pine snake, which is Pituophis melanoleucus loading eye. And we'll talk about their distributions and everything in more detail here shortly. But I was looking around for a paper today that would kind of just highlight our animals and that we're talking about. And I was happy to find out that there is actually a nice little paper from way back in the before days, and it's a fun one. So the paper we're going to talk about is titled Prey Handling and Diet of Louisiana Pine Snakes and Black Pine Snakes with Comparisons to Other Selected Colubrid Snakes. And it is Rudolph et al. 2002. So this is, like I said, it's a fairly old paper. But the reason why they looked at the diet comparisons between ruthveni equals Louisiana pine snake when I say that, and loading eye equals black pine snakes when I say that, because I'm not going to say those big, long names, is that the Louisiana pine snake, Pituophis ruthveni, it's a bit of a habitat specialist. You find them in what was historically longleaf pine ecological systems, which these are systems that are dominated by fire. So fire is needed to burn the underbrush to keep the forests dominated by longleaf pines. Many people don't know that longleaf pine ecosystems went from Texas all the way along the Gulf, clear up into the Carolinas, and they might have even made it just barely into Virginia. This giant swath of the coastal plain, and we clear cut them to hell and back. Like, they're actually one of the most imperiled ecosystems on our planet. But in these systems, a lot of the snakes we love, that's where they live. Indigo snakes equal longleaf pine ecosystem. Southern pine snakes equal longleaf pine ecosystem. And ruthveni was definitely found there. And in those pine forests, there is a rodent called a pocket gopher. And pocket gophers, I'm looking at the genus name here, Giamese breviceps, Baird's pocket gopher to be precise. You need to look up a pocket gopher right now. Hit pause. They look like freaking alien rodent squirrels from hell that were dropped here from another. They do not look like something that is real. And when you look at a pocket gopher, they've got these enormous incisors, like all rodents do. They actually protrude out of their face. Okay. And the way that ruthveni kills them to feed on is they go down in these burrows and they pin them to the side of the burrow. They don't actually bite with their mouths to constrict the gophers. They go past the gopher, get their body alongside it, and they pin it up against the wall of the burrow. While they're doing that, the gophers have this crazy way of defending themselves, which is they just basically say, oh, hell, there's a snake, and they start backpedaling sand as fast as they can. And if you're watching the YouTube video, I am a gopher backpedaling sand. Welcome to my class. I do this while I'm teaching all the time. So they literally fill the freaking burrow up before the snake can get to them. Like it's this crazy predator-prey relationship. And so in this paper, they pretty much knew ruthveni did that, but they were wondering, does loading eye do that? Because where the black pine snakes live, there are pocket gophers, but they're not necessarily a longleaf pine specialist. They can be found in hardwood forests and some of the bottomland systems where you don't have the pocket gophers. And so what they did, and I don't know how they got away with this. They got away with this in 2002. If you tried to do this study in 2024, it's not going to happen. This is one of my favorite things about this project. They went out and just caught a bunch of freaking pocket gophers, like 30 of them. And they brought them into the lab and they got an aquarium and they built a burrow. So they basically put sand in there. They dropped the gophers. The gophers made a burrow and then they threw in a snake. and saw what the hell would happen. And today in the world of science, you can't, I mean, it would be very difficult to get permits to do that. But basically what they found out was really interesting. So we'll scroll a little bit here. But essentially what was found is that, I'll let you kind of look at this table if you're on YouTube. The Louisiana pine snakes love this. They went down the burrows. The pocket gophers freaked out. They started kicking the sand up. And Ruth and I just doesn't care. It's got that big rostral scale we all know that pits have. And it just bulldozed its way right through the little dams that the gophers were creating. And then went past the gophers, pinned them up against the wall of the aquarium or the wall of the burrow and ate them. So they evolved this specialized behavior. They included in this study not only black pine snakes, but a couple other snakes. They included bull snakes and Texas rat snakes. And basically, to make a long story short, bull snakes live where another species of Giamese occurs. I just butchered that genus name, so sorry. They do the same thing. So the bulls, bam, right through the sand dam, pinned the gophers and ate them. But the Texas rat snake, they actually used the word awkward in the paper. They awkwardly consumed the gophers. So they did what they should do on the surface, which is bite, constrict, and then consume. And the loading eye just didn't know what the hell to do. The black pines went down in the hole. Some of them bit the gophers, tried to constrict them down there. Some of them went down, faced off with the gopher and went, hell no, and then got out of the burrow and were just like, yeah, no, this isn't for me. And didn't try to eat them. And what they're kind of getting at with this paper is that you can have these two related species, black pines and Louisiana pines, that live very close to each other geographically, but their range doesn't overlap. And it doesn't overlap probably because these two fossorial snakes have very different diets. And so it kind of shows that the Louisiana pine snakes are specialists on the pocket gophers and have evolved these specialized behaviors. And the loading eye are more generalized, and they'll basically kill any rodent they encounter on the ground. And for the record, the Ruth and I did that too. They didn't just eat the gophers. There's a little table in here, which I can go back up to. And it shows the different species that were eaten. And you can see like the Ruth and I are mainly eating the gophers, but then they're eating things like cotton rats. That's Sigmodon, Hispidus. Paramiscus species are just deer mice, if you know what those are. Unidentified mammals, turtle eggs. And then if you look at what loading eye's eating, it's eating everything. And it's also eating things like rabbits. Selvagus, that's the cottontail rabbit genus. So it was a really fun paper. I liked it. I was happy that I got to talk about some good old-fashioned natural history and an experimental setup. But yeah, that's what I got for our science update today. And if you want this paper, I have it. So message me and I can send it. It's a small PDF. I can just literally fire it off to you on Facebook if you message me that way. So that's our science update. A little bit of learning before we get to the main event. Okay.
Very neat. Very neat.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, let's jump into the market update. And as always, the market update is sponsored by Show Me Reptiles and the Show Me Reptile shows, who have shows all over the place. So please go to showmesnakes.com. And that way you can find all of the Show Me Reptile shows near you. And as we stated before, Mickey absolutely made Colubrid Fest happen.
Mm-hmm.
So please support those that support the community and support those shows. And if you see Mickey, give him a thank you, give him a pat on the back for all that he's done for us and continues to do. I know, actually, I can say that, as we discussed before, we do want a different venue than what we had for Colubrid Fest. Still going to be in Indianapolis. I know that Mickey contacted 2 hotel convention centers today and is waiting for a call back. So, he's already making the moves, and we're 1-2 weeks out, from just having Colubrid Fest occur. So, okay. So as we stated on the last show that, we're not going to do graphs unless it's the beginning of the month. And so with that, I'm going to turn to a couple things that first, what I've noticed as far as trend in business. So it's following exactly what it typically has done. And I don't know if it's coincidental, but this is what I've always blamed it on. The 2 weeks leading up to Tinley, I've always felt sales slow. And I think that that's people saving up for Tinley. It seems like all attention's going on there. And it's not that, well, Clint, everybody in the country is not going to Tinley. And I get that. However, there do seem to be a lot of specials that get ran by those that aren't vending at Tinley, things like that, in an attempt to compete. So I think that it does happen. It is one of those events that's going to affect the market. But at the same time, this time of year begins to slow a little bit. This is where we've went past the peak now. We've peaked as far as hatchlings in the colubrid realm. You know, you're still going to have black milk, subox, things like that coming, double clutches that are hatching, but the bulk of it has passed. I think balls will still continue to see more of those, you know, listed over the next month or two, but it slows down a little up until if you're retail, and really even if you're a breeder online, it's going to peak again at Black Friday and that weekend. And then it kind of dies down a little more. Now for the retail, I start doing very well leading into Christmas, but for a lot of others, it tends to slow a little until after the first. So the fourth quarter is definitely the slowest time of the year for reptile breeders and really the industry as a whole. So don't be surprised. That's not something to be afraid of. It's not something to think is terrible. And I'm certainly not going to tell you don't post your animals, don't get things out there, because there's no way you're going to sell them by just leaving them in a tub in your basement and not telling anybody about them. Doesn't work that way. So it's the good thing too about it being a slow time is this is when you can concentrate on better pictures, better descriptions, you know, get them out there and just get things visible, you know, and be ready. Be ready. There's still people that are going to continue to purchase. I also think one of the things that may have affected some of the market, this again, not at a huge level, but for Metazotics specifically, because we've felt more of a slowdown over those past couple of weeks than our run rate. Still running higher, of course, than last year, but not with as much cushion. So not as high of a comp. And for us, I think that was because it's not only the Tinley slowdown, but Colubrid Fest. Colubrid Fest was a monster event for Metazotics. We did very, very well there. And I think that, you know, a lot of that could have been where some of that would have been our online sales, you know, if not for Colubrid Fest. And in fact, it's funny because Steve came up to me this morning and goes, "Do we have anything going out today?" Because he's the one who takes care of all the shipping of the live animals. And I go, "Steve, I actually don't think we have anything even in queue, meaning we don't have any animals that have been sold online that are waiting." And that like never happens. So 'tis the season. No worries there. You know, just something to get used to. Talked with Mickey earlier, and we were chuckling at what the top 3 searches were for Show Me Marketplace. And it's funny because I want to say them. We're going to kind of roll our eyes, but then it makes a good point. So the number 1 search, you know, we're not surprised that it has to do with ball pythons, right?
Yeah.
But literally, the number 1 search is ball python. That's the search, ball python.
Isn't there like a folder or something?
That's it. Just ball python. That's the number 1 search. The number 2 search, snake.
Oh my God. Okay.
The
cool.
number 3 surprised me, turtles.
Oh.
So now here's what, you know, first we chuckle, you know, at those being the top searches, but really that tells us something. It actually, you would think that, well, that doesn't give me anything. No, that tells us quite a bit, because what type of individuals are searching those terms specifically? Those are going to be new hobbyists, new keepers. Okay, so that is actually pretty exciting. And I mean, I've got the numbers on how many times those were searched too. And it goes to show what we've stated. In fact, I was just on thank God it's Colubrid's podcast last week, and we were talking about Mexican Black Kings. I know that's one that gets brought up all the time on almost like every other show that we go on, because it's there's so much story there with Mexican Black Kings in the market. And I talked about how everyone thought that MBKs were going to plummet after they, skyrocketed. And really, they've held pretty firm the past few years at the same spot. And the reason is because a Mexican Black King has such appeal to a new keeper, easy to take care of, beautiful animal, that sheen, of black on them. And I think that even though they are being produced more and more, there's so many new keepers that come into the hobby. I can't tell you how many shows I have someone go, "Oh, Mexican Black Kings, that's exactly what I've been after. I've been looking at these online for months." And they're a new keeper, and that's the snake that they, have narrowed down and want. So it goes to show that we talk about the market, and there's individuals who say that the market's down and, yada, yada. There still continues to be an influx of new keepers, new hobbyists, thanks to people like Dave Kaufman, Snake Discovery. There's a lot of that social media presence, YouTubers that Clint's Reptiles, the other Clint, that bring so many new people into the hobby. And those searches right there tell us that it's continuing to grow. And those hobbyists, or those newcomers, are continuing to look for animals to start. So that's good news. I mean, that helps us all.
Can I interrupt real quick? This is just in honor of my family. My son, you brought up Clint's Reptiles, right? Yeah. My son literally says that he is the alternate form of me. Like he's the Jedi and I'm the Sith Lord of, because every time he comes on, I'm like, okay, cool. And he's serving a wonderful purpose by bringing in all those young people. But my biology department was like, we're going to bring Clint. This is a funny story. I don't think I told you this story. My sister-in-law works in my biology department, and she's in charge of the biology club. And so I'm walking down the hallway. It's right before Colubrid Fest. I just gotten the shirts, and Holly knew about this relationship between me and the other Clint. And she said, "Hey, we're going to bring Clint in to do the bio club." And I kind of stopped and was like, why the hell didn't he tell me that? Like, what are you talking about? And I was like, okay, that's cool. And they were like, oh, okay. And then I went out and I came back in with a box. And meanwhile, I'm just like so freaking confused. Because I was like, I know Bartley would have told me this. Like, what is going on? And then I was walking back in and they thought, we thought you were going to be really mad. Now I'm even more confused. Like
why's Clint talking to my sister?
Yeah. You're bringing my brother from another mother into West Virginia. I don't care. And so I said, you'll like this. Like, well, we're talking about my Clint, right? So you're now my Clint. And then Holly goes, you have a Clint? This was like the most bizarre. And then she was like, Clint's Reptiles. And then it all got real. Because I was like, oh no, he's not coming here. Bartley's welcome here anytime. We can't bring him on. So yeah, no, it was like the most confusing conversation I've had in like 5 years.
So it's not the first time that the two of us have been confused. There's been a couple stories. The most recent one was Colubrid Fest, because as you know, I chatted back and forth with Snake Discovery, and they weren't able to make Colubrid Fest, and the reason they couldn't was because they had already agreed that they were going to be going to Clint's Reptiles. He had an anniversary thing on this place that he opened in Utah. And one of my friends online had messaged, and she asked me, hey, is Snake Discovery going to be there? I'm like, no, they won't be at Colubrid Fest. They've got something else locked in. Fast forward about a month, and maybe even 2 months from that conversation, and she messages me with a screenshot where it says something about Snake Discovery. Oh, well, they're going to Clint's thing. And she said, I thought you said they weren't coming. I'm like, no, that's the other Clint. It's his. No, it's not that.
And I'll let you finish the market update, but I do want to leave. I don't want anybody to think I've got beef with Clint, the other Clint. Okay. He's doing a great thing. I've had many young people come up to me. And so, if you're inspiring that group of people, so we're not going to use this to create a war between Zac and
not at all. If this ever gets to Clint,
it's just a running joke because he's so upbeat and happy, and I have a perpetual case of RBF that I'm trying to fight all the time. So
No,
anyway,
if this ever gets to Clint, you know, I want him to know that he actually was a big part of helping us breed green-killed lizards here in the shop.
there you go.
We had his show on for that specific reason, and we watched it multiple times to see what we could pick up, learn, and adjust. So, yeah, I like him. He puts on a good show.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So now, as far as some kind of, well, really the big thing that hit the hobby and it hit it today. If you logged into Morph Market today, you probably noticed that you had to agree to a new terms of use. And that was because Morph Market launched their shipping service today. This is something that had been kept kind of quiet for the most part throughout the hobby. And the way that it stands right now, it's about 65%, I think, off of standard retail FedEx rates. For a lot of people, because there's different discount rates with the different shippers that are out there right now. I know that it's very competitive. And there's been a lot of talks, and it's, you know, because it concerns individuals on what it means for the other shipping companies. It also, for some, you know, they're very excited, very happy, you know, because it's better than the shipping rates that they're working with. And it's definitely the biggest talk in the industry at the moment was this change. And I think that over time it's going to adjust a little bit. Right now, everybody's on the same rates. But eventually it will shift to the best rates go to the highest paid accounts. You know what I mean? So you have the pro account, you get the best rates and on down. It's definitely something new. I do know that they were not the only ones, are not the only ones working on it. But you know, there's still, it's launched. It's interesting. We'll see how it shakes out for the industry as a whole. Neat, different. So I've got, it's one where, you know, for me personally, I'm kind of friends with everyone involved, you know, whether from Morph Market, the other shipping companies. So I'm like, oh, I just kind of have to let the chips, you know,
all where they're going.
Exactly. Because it's, you know, I just hope there's enough room for everybody and everybody is able to succeed. So last thing for the market update, and this comes from the Show Me Marketplace for buyers accounts. If you use the code, use code Marketplace, and you'll receive a $5 credit towards tickets. So if you have buyers accounts with Show Me Marketplace, you can get $5 towards tickets to Show Me shows. So that's something Mickey sent over to me. I want to make sure that we got to share that with everybody. And as a reminder, if shipping through Redline, please use code CCRadio5 to save yourself a little bit of money there as well. I think that's what I got for the market update.
Okay. So we want to bring Michael on.
Let's do this. I'm excited for this one. I really, it's going to be good.
All right, cool. So to the stage, we bring Michael Coone. How are you, sir?
Guys. Wonderful. How are you guys?
We're doing well.
Very
thank you for patiently waiting for us to get through all that. So
thanks for having me on. I enjoyed the research on the pines also.
Thank you.
Good stuff.
Yeah, no, I've been geeked ever since you agreed to come on. These are two that don't. It's weird. I feel like these two animals have a very dedicated following of a few, but I also feel like that's growing, and I hope that this episode will help get them the love that they truly, truly deserve because they're fantastic.
They really are.
Yeah, so that's our goal. So I've been communicating back and forth with Michael, and you know, right now, transparency is best. Michael has gifted a pair of these animals to me and the school, the Ruth and I specifically. So first and foremost, props for that. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. You're welcome
for that. But as always, we have our kind of classic question, which is, how in the world did you get into keeping snakes, and how long have you been doing that?
So I've been keeping snakes since 1983.
There you go.
Yeah. And so just a kid growing up in Greensboro, North Carolina, flipped some trash in a ditch and found a worm snake. And I was so fascinated by it, brought it home, kept it for a few days, didn't know what to do with it. But it started something for me. I was able to talk my dad into the old, I don't know if you remember the little golden books, field guides,
Oh, sure
some
do.
of those. And then later, Peterson's. And then it went on to garter snakes and DKs. And then, but that was long before the internet.
Yep.
And, I can remember arguing with my dad about, he swore they were cottonmouth in Rockingham County, North Carolina, which is along the Virginia border. And I was 8 years old. And I said, well, where are they? And he said, they're in the crayfish holes along the creek at my grandpa's creek. And so I borrowed my grandpa's shovel at age 8 and I dug out those crayfish holes until I broke the shovel at 8 years old. It kind of speaks to how stubborn I was and even at a young age. And so I was just really into it. We moved into the country when I was 10 years old. And of course, then I was able to find Eastern Kings and hognose snakes and kind of expand my repertoire, all the cool stuff I was finding at that point in time. And somewhere along the way, I set this goal of finding every North Carolina species, native North Carolina species. And again, back in those days, all we had was Peterson's. We didn't have the internet yet. And so, they said Scarlet Kings were found in pine forest. And so all we had up there along the North Carolina, Virginia border were those Virginia pines that kind of grow close together. And so I can remember being, 12 years old, 13 years old, crawling on my knees and elbows through those little tight patches of Virginia pine looking for Scarlet Kings and pine snakes. Because you just didn't know. I didn't know there were different types of pine snakes at that age, and then, as time went on, the internet introduced you to more detailed information and started connecting individuals. And so you were able to access a lot better information and be able to kind of expand on that.
Very
Very
nice.
cool.
I like that goal. That goal of finding, all of them in North Carolina. That's neat. I like that. I think that field guide kind of made that goal for a lot of us back then.
Yeah.
Because to have all those pictures and all that, the range maps and everything, it just made you feel like, you basically had a checklist in your hand of what you've seen. And I remember I still have mine with certain things marked that I found whenever I was a kid. And, I had that same kind of mentality. I'm going to find them all. And I failed. I
haven't found them yet. I haven't found them yet either, but it's a work in progress. Hopefully I got a little time left.
You got it.
Gotcha.
So what all do you keep currently?
But I keep a very small collection. And over the years, I've kept just about everything in terms of North American, Central American, South American milks. All of the Getula complex I've kept and bred, all those over the years. Mole Kings, I've bred Mole Kings before. Scarlet Kings, the same. Now all I keep primarily are just Louisiana pines and black pines. I've got a pair of Stewart's milks that are locale specific. They've nice. Kind of grown because I love the Central South American milks, the big calm milks. But outside of that, that's really, I think I have a pair of like yearling Depii Jani, and I've got one male Pituophis lineaticolus. And I'm on the search for a female. And one of the what motivates me about the Lennies is the breeding difficulties that we're having with those. And I've been really successful with a lot of the other Pituophis over the years. And so I was like, if I could get a hold of a female, I'd like to take a swing at that. But I don't know if, and we could talk about this more later, but I don't know if the issues with the Lennies have to do with all the inbreeding and the genetic bottlenecking. And so we can certainly talk about some of that here later. But really my whole collection for the most part is Louisiana pines, black pines, because anytime I get offered something else or I see a chance to get something else, I just think to myself, well, that's one more tub. I could keep a baby Louisiana pine for another year and see how it colors up, Like I just love Louisiana pines. I've kept snakes for like 40 years now, and Louisiana pines are by far my favorite of all my snakes.
What moved you in that direction? Because it sounds like you had, the gamut. You have worked with so much. What narrowed your focus so tight onto those two?
Yeah, we love this question.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I think two things. So the work to find all the North Carolina snakes at some point ran into the keeping of snakes, and the way that happened was I was looking for. I spent a good bit of time looking for eastern milk snakes and corn snakes in the western part of the state. And I wasn't finding either one. And so I reached out to a professor at Appalachian State University up in Boone, North Carolina. His name was Wayne Vandevender.
Oh, yeah, I know him.
And yeah, so Dr. Vandevender, if you look through all of your field guides, a lot of your books and things like that, he's credited for a lot of these photos, throughout the years. And so I reached out to Dr. Vandevender and I said, hey, I'm trying to find eastern milk snakes. Could give me any tips? And he gave me a few tips. And then he said, I've got one here that's one of the students found at I can't remember. One of the big, I think it was Grandfather Mountain. I got one here. One of the students brought back from around near Grandfather. If you want to come up and take a look at it, and I was excited because one of the things about the variation in species from place to place. So I go up to his place at his lab at the university, and he's showing me all of his snakes, and he pulls out this tub, and he's got an Escambia pine snake in it. And he shows me, and it's one of the real black ones. The cool thing about Escambia is they're right there on that line. Escambia County, Florida, is between the Florida-Alabama line, and they're you could hatch out a clutch of those, and some will look like Florida pines, and some will look like black pines. They're really cool snakes. So this one happened to be a really black one. It was gorgeous. It still has the banding at the tail and whatnot, and has some little hints of pink here and there. And he shows it to me, and he starts to tell me the story about it and how Paul Moeller was the Florida State biologist at the time, and Paul was able to obtain a couple of those animals in 1980 or 81, and Paul gave those to Dr. Abercrombie at Wofford College, and Dr. Ab had bred those and bred several generations of those through the years, and was just getting them out to different people. And I was so fascinated by the history of those animals. And that was before I really appreciated how rare they are, because later, as I spent more and more time in the field and traveled to look for snakes at different places, I realized how hard it is to find a pine snake. I mean, it's, you talk about finding the hogs, and I know you do a lot of work with the hogs, and hogs are hard to find. Like my whole life, I might have found 10 my entire life. But so I assume that finding the pine is like finding a hog nose, but they're just in few, they just don't range the same distance. So you just can't find them. And so I was just totally fascinated with the history and the lineage. And so I'd always liked pines. I always liked how they're a little bigger than the other snakes. And I knew they needed some help in terms of, even back then, in terms of, protection. But that just won me over with pine snakes. And so, so Dr. Vandevender gave me one of his Escambia pines. And I think that just started me down that path. And I still kept a lot of other stuff until I went through a divorce about 12 or 13 years ago, and I had to get rid of most of my collection. And I was a single dad for a while, and I was eating pancakes every night with my sons for 6 months. And I could barely feed myself and my sons, much less my snakes. And so the only snakes I kept through that divorce were a couple of the South Mountains corns. I don't know if you guys knew about the Cleveland County corns. I'd kind of found some of those years ago, and that was like a 20-year project to find them and get them up and started out in the hobby. So that was all I kept, because I realized of all the snakes I had kept, those were the snakes that were irreplaceable, because they'd taken so long to find. And I should have been a little wiser looking back, and I should have kept those Escambias as well. But then getting, kind of starting my second life, getting married again and having a home again, all this sort of thing, I rebuilt my collection. And as I rebuilt my collection, I went back to a lot of the stuff that I loved before: Andean milks, black milks, Eastern milks, king snakes, different things like that. But I knew, like, I could take a trip somewhere, not in the mountains. Those mountain corns are hard to find, but like down to the coast and find corns. I could take a trip and find corns. I could take a trip and find Eastern kings. But I knew that the pine snakes were kind of irreplaceable, particularly the Louisianas and the black pines. And so I started to just kind of move a lot of my other stuff out and just work predominantly with I'd worked with pines since 2004. But I decided, hey, I'm just going to focus on these guys. And as you know, it's momentum kind of starts to build. People know you what you're into, and and I had opportunities and connections with different people. I became friends with a gentleman named Dr. Giacomo Meeker. And he wrote a really great article on breeding pine snakes on kingsnake.com back in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say anybody who's interested in breeding pines, you need to read his article, because he kept up with temps. He just did a fantastic job of, like, what does it take to be successful in breeding pines. So I read his article and I reached out to him, and he and I became really good friends, and we worked on different projects and different things like that together. And he introduced me to Louisiana's, and I'd never seen a Louisiana pine in 2018. And he said, you got to see these snakes. He said, they're amazing. I said, well, I've seen them in books, and he's like, no, you got to see a Louisiana pine. He said, these are my favorite snakes. And so I was able to kind of get my first pair of Louisianas from Dr. Meeker, and fell in love as soon as I held them. And so one of the things I tell people is, you'll see people who just saw the pictures of Louisianas, and they'll be like, oh, I'm not crazy about Louisianas. And the first thing I ask them is, have you ever held one? Because, man, they got these big chunky heads and these short fat bodies. They're like a giant Simus is the best thing I could kind of compare them to. And like, they're just an awesome snake in every way. And then as far as keeping them and caring for them, they do great in a tub or in a display. They never fuss about feeding. They have a feeding response like a Florida king snake, but they're never going to musk you. They seldom ever bite you. They let you know if they don't like something you're doing. You know it. Like, they're going to let you know. They get a little vocal with you. But man, they're just awesome snakes, man. They really are. So that's how I got started, and how I kind of fell in love with that species, and also realizing how much help they needed. In the private sector, I know a lot of the zoos had kind of combined their efforts and moved everything into just a couple different zoos to work with them. And I know private sector, with the protection on the black pines and Louisiana pines, it turned a lot of folks off to keeping them. And I'm not a commercial breeder. And so I have a pretty successful career outside of snakes. And so I think I was a good candidate to just kind of put that effort into these guys to hopefully keep a nice diverse group, not just in my collection, but in collections across the United States and different states for years to come. And that's kind of what my mission is.
That's really neat, because I can tell you, I mean, I know just here in Indiana, it's hard. It's hard to find, anyone. Black pine specifically are the ones I've been after here recently. And the local biology professor, or the biology professor at the local college here, friends with, and I know he keeps some. I've got a couple males myself, and we're probably going to try to. Unfortunately, his female's got some age on her, so we're going to cross our fingers, see what happens. But and I have several people asking me, for them here too, and that's part of it. With that, there's certain states where you can get them and get them easily, because there are people who are working with them, and then there's other states where they're begging because there's nobody working with them in the state. So it's it's difficult, and I'm glad to hear that from you. That how much you like getting them into the hands of others to keep this moving, keep it going. So I think it's important.
Thank you. I totally agree, and I think with some of the the protections and the permit requirements, things like that, a lot of folks. You're taking a species that has like a pretty serious genetic bottleneck already, because there's so few specimens taken out of the wild, and then you're locking them into a state where a lot of inbreeding could potentially occur. And so, I think to be able to get them out and get diverse groups out, and so part of my goal is to get unrelated pairs out to a lot of places, so that we have several generations of success with breeding.
Because we're going to end up talking about husbandry and how to take care of these, but since it's been brought up, let's go ahead and talk about what kind of the regulations and permit system, what that looks like, because this is obviously, anytime we have an episode on any species, I go back, I listen to it, and it makes me want that species. Even more, because obviously we're talking, to someone who's extremely passionate about that species. And you guys have heard me say on here before, passion is contagious.
Mhm.
So, you know, if we're going to have
Very
this
much.
passion, right? If we're going to have this passion about the species, I think we need to let everyone know here are the hurdles and or methods to be able to work with these animals. So can you kind of
and real quick,
navigate that? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I want to add one more thing, just in case you don't know why. I think I got the dates right, but the Louisiana pine snake was listed federally as threatened in 2018, and the black pine snake was listed federally as threatened in 2015. And when you get that federal listing, that is what then prompts you can't do interstate commerce with them without paperwork. So basically, you can move them within a state, but you can't move them out of state. And just to give people, you know, this also applies to scientists. So like my crayfish that's federally listed that I do a lot of work with, technically speaking, and I want everybody to picture West Virginia in their head right now. We're not Virginia, by the way, different state. So West Virginia, we do not have a freaking straight line in this state other than our border with Pennsylvania and Maryland. Like everything is a curve. And I am technically not supposed to drive when I have to move the crayfish from Southern West Virginia to my facility at the university. The fastest way to do that is to hop on Interstate 77, go up to Cambridge, Ohio, and then across Ohio to Wheeling. And technically, I'm not supposed to do that. I'm supposed to go on back roads and never cross that state border with those animals, because if I cross it, if I don't have it on my permit from the feds that says interstate commerce, or I can go across the state border, I can actually get in trouble. So this isn't just selling snake. This is literally biologists working with the animals too. And this is just to apply the strictest protections on them, and to hold everybody to the same standard. So that's why we're talking about what we're talking about, to give some of you context that might be like, well, why are we talking about this? So with that being said, take it away, Michael.
So I'd say the first thing I would say about the permit process is it's not a bad thing for the animals. What it does is, what I've noticed doing this for a few years now, is that it eliminates impulse buyers. And so if somebody wants one of my black pines or one of my Louisiana pines, what usually happens is, and you notice I don't really advertise anywhere. I throw out a few pics of my adults in the springtime, maybe when they're laying their eggs, and people reach out to me. Most of my animals are sold shortly after not sold, but spoken for shortly after the eggs are laid. And then those folks have to wait, usually from, April, May, sometimes June, depending on what time I brought my snakes up, into the fall. And so we develop a relationship. We talk throughout the year. As we get closer, I will send out all the documentation to kind of give them a head start on what's expected in terms of the permits and such. In terms of what that entitles, there's an application that they have to submit to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. There's a lot of questions in that application about their intentions and things like that, and I always help the buyer with that sort of thing. They have to do a sketch of their snake room and how they intend to keep those animals. I have to write a letter as the breeder confirming that my animals are legal and captive bred. And they can submit the permits either paper application or electronically online. Permits cost $100, paid to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I knock $100 off of whatever the market rate is on those animals at that time. I essentially absorb the cost of the permit for the buyer is what I do. And again, my goal is to get the animals out to the right people. And so I don't mind doing that. And so, so once the snakes are born, at that point, they can go ahead and submit their permits. I assist by getting them the breeder letter, walking them through, maybe giving them some examples and things like that to help them. Sometimes, and it's a little different depending on what their intentions are. Folks talk about, if education is one of their goals. Sometimes it's captive propagation because they want to, sustain captive populations, which is really wise. If it's education's goal, sometimes U.S. Fish and Wildlife might want a PowerPoint. I'll help them get a PowerPoint together that they're going to use to help teach people about whether it's the destruction of the longleaf or the problems associated with, the decline of these two particular animals. And so I help them through that process. They submit their permit. It takes 60 to 90 days for approval on the permits. The ladies at the southeastern region are fantastic. The biologists that work down there, Karen Marlowe, her name comes to mind. I've worked with her for years. She's awesome, dude.
She's helped me with my permits. She is great.
She really is. She's helpful. And then Nikki, I can't remember Nikki's last name right offhand because I've worked with Karen more, but the two of them, they're usually the people I work with, and they're great, not only with permits, but answering my questions in between, like, hey, what do you guys consider an Escambia pine snake? Are the Florida pines going to be protected anytime soon? Like, I'm asking all these different questions, and they never blow me off. They always answer my questions. I think when you work with these type of animals, you have to be really transparent with what you're doing, with Fish and Wildlife, and let them know what your intentions are. And the more they kind of know you and know who you are, I think they realize kind of what you stand for, and they're great. They're good people. I think they want the same thing we want.
They do.
Do you find that the permit or being approved for a permit is any easier or more difficult for either one of those species, or is it just the same?
It's the same. And this is something people don't realize is you can actually, let's say, because I breed both, let's say if someone wanted a pair of each, you can put both on one permit.
Yep.
And that's something. And so you get one permit cost and you can get, 2.2 of each. And with one permit cost. So that's kind of nice, but no, I don't think it's any different. Initially, I wondered if the Louisianas would be harder because they were more recently protected, but I haven't noticed anything like that. I think it's more, in the intent of the person applying for the permit and how well that person, documents that intent.
Gotcha. That's interesting. Yeah. I didn't know that was part of the permit process. I thought it was, more. To be honest, all the permits that I'm typically dealing with are interstate travel, taking different things into another state. And it seems like, you just list out what it's going to be. Now, given they're not federally protected, I'm saying that, but they're protected. It's things that are protected within the state because it's native. But typically it's more or less a fee. You're paying a fee and listing it out, and it's, goes through. I mean, that's interesting to me. That's really what they're looking at more than anything is, why do you want these? What are you doing with them?
There's some love that goes into those permits, man. They want to make sure those animals are going to the right people, and I keep records of where all my snakes go as well. And of course, then I keep all records of all of my permits. I keep a folder for all that as well with my people, and it's nice because you have almost a stud book for your animals and where they went, and so. I've had situations where I've sent a pair to one person and that person has sold the pair to someone else. And then that other person reached out to me and said, tell me about the lineage of my animals, or tell me what my Louisiana pines weighed when they were born. And I can go, if it was one of those years, and I can't guarantee that every year I weighed every snake and documented it. But if it was one of those years, I could go look and be like, hey, your snake weighed, 102 grams when it was born. And so it's kind of cool how you kind of track where those animals go and what they're doing. It's neat.
Yeah, don't ask that from me. No, it's hard enough to ask me how much an animal that's here right now weighs. So that's impressive, Michael.
No, it's not that. I keep my collection really small. It's not that impressive. I try to keep around 15 animals in my collection total.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so not counting when I have babies, because, baby season, that number goes up pretty high, and I've worked through that through the course of the next, 6 months or so. But I try to keep my collection very small. I don't have a lot of traffic in or out because I'm not quarantined and all that, but I'm just terrified of something that might come in and damage what I have,
Oh, yeah.
So I don't have a lot of collection a lot of traffic in or out of my collection. I keep it very small. I'm very attentive to my animals and things like that, which we can talk about husbandry in a minute. But I feel like for me, I have a lot of irons in the fire outside of the snake. So for me to do it well, I have to really, keep it small.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Now we talked about, the commerce side of it, for the permits and whatnot. Yeah. Now, gifting, we hear that word gifting when it talks about even natives in certain states that you can't sell because it's native, but you can gift. But in this state, you cannot. So where does that come into play in this arena?
Good question. So if you gift one of these snakes across state lines and it's a true gift, you're not trading, you're not taking any money back for it. If you just gift it, it's not commerce. And so the interstate commerce permit does not apply in that situation because it's a gift. Now, but as snake guys, that you have to really emphasize that hey, when I give you this, I don't expect anything in return from you.
Right.
Because it can't be a trade, because a trade makes it commerce. And so if you're going to trade, I would trade my Louisianas to you for, whatever. It's no longer, it makes it commerce. And so you got to apply for a permit.
And I want to stress that to our listeners, because that's actually, found ourselves in, that situation to ensure to cover it's probably best that you have that documented.
Yes.
If you were gifted a, federally protected species in these pines that we're talking about right now, having a letter, signed letter,
yes.
if it's coming from someone who works at a university or anything like that, have it on letterhead stating this was given for this purpose to this individual on this date, what it was, how many, whatever. And so that it's, you have that documentation proving how you legally obtained that animal without obtaining the permit.
Yes, I think that's an excellent, or an email, or just something from the person. I like the idea of having something signed. That makes it a little more solid. And some people, sometimes they'll just do an email. But I'm always clear with folks, and there's a lot of really good people in the hobby. And so if you give someone something, they're like, oh, I've got this, I want to, and I'm like, no, just pay it forward. Do right. When you breed these animals, you gift them to somebody else who needs them, who's going to take care of them, and it may be in a state that doesn't have them. And just pay it forward. But I think you have to be real careful about that. You don't want to get in a situation where you get yourself in trouble with it.
And I want to stress a little bit here. If you are gifting and you are receiving said gift, and you want to give something in return, don't.
Yes.
With federally listed species, just don't. Wait a while and then be like, hey, I've got an extra gray band. Here you go. Because then times, you're not necessarily giving it in response to receiving the Ruthveni or whatever. But I've noticed through the generosity of several people that when I would, back in the days when we would just give the snakes to various people that we had produced at the university, there was always this like, oh, well, I got to give you something, which actually got me in a lot of trouble. Because I would go to the reptile show to offload 50 snakes. It was usually the Zirkles, by the way. So thanks, Amy and Rob. And then I would come back to school and Kinsey and Lauren would be like, what the hell? You have an 8-foot beauty snake now. Where are we going to put that? And I was like, I can't say no to that. Like, I have a pair of Alterna behind me. Thank you, Zirkles. So anyway, but in this scenario, you don't want to do that. Because it could be perceived as commerce, like you said. And now you've literally broken a federal law. And we don't want to break any laws, but if there's a law we definitely don't want to break, it's a federal law. They've got some pretty stiff consequences. So,
yeah, 100%. The black pines that I have here, I've got copies of the letter in my desk, and we have a copy of the letter in the snake room. Nice. That in that particular room, that the animals, just because I looked at it as we're a business, and we if anybody would be looked at hard, it would be us. Yeah. So we're going to make sure we have everything right there, in the event that we're ever looked into. So good stuff. I think this is very helpful.
Yeah,
for listeners.
And all this applies to indigos too. It's the same process.
Yeah, so we actually learned a lot from indigos when you looked at some of the issues with the inbreeding and things like that with the indigos. I think it gave us a little bit of a head start for the black pines and then the Louisiana pines in terms of how to ensure the diversity within the captive populations when you work with federal permits. Because I don't think people thought about that with indigos 25 years ago, and we've run into all these different issues now, and the Louisiana pine is much more rare than the indigo snake. And if we screwed up what is in our captive population of Louisiana pines with too much inbreeding right now, we wouldn't have any more in 20 years.
Yeah.
So I think taking what we learn and apply it to these guys is important.
It's good you brought that up. It's probably not the rarest snake in North America, because there's some little diminutive snakes that people don't pay any attention to, like crown snakes and the Keys and things like that. But for a large, big snake across North America, Ruthveni is definitely one of the rarest, if not the rarest. They are far rarer than an indigo. Indigos have a range that goes through Georgia, Florida, all the way down to South Florida. They're still popping up here, there, and everywhere. but Louisiana pines are just right there on the Louisiana-Texas border where that remnant bit of pine forest is. So, yeah. So the work you're doing is the Lord's work. Good job.
Thank you.
Have to say that.
Absolutely.
Well, you pass the halfway point in your life, and you realize you only have so much time, and you want to make an impact, and you look at some of the work that people before, like someone like Terry Vanderveer or John Ginter, people who've done this work in the that has really brought all this awareness to these animals, and sustained a lot of captive populations for a lot of these animals. And it really gets you thinking when you kind of stare down your second half, and you think about how you want to spend it, and what kind of good you want to do with it.
Yeah, I could tell you, if there are two guys that understand exactly what you're saying, it's right here.
Yeah.
I mean, as we said on our last episode, we literally just got our nonprofit launched for conservation, and it's all comes down to, here we are, gray in the beards, and we want to make sure there's something good that we're doing with all the time invested in this hobby. So
yeah, I love it. It's like you get to kind of hold on to being that 6-year-old that found that first snake. It's just a good feeling.
Yeah.
All right.
What can we do now?
So let's segue over to keeping them. We'll do keeping, then we'll talk a little bit about lineages and things like that. So, what is your approach to keeping? Let's start with, we're going to do a little bit out of whack. We usually do like adults, and then we kind of segue into keeping the little ones, because it's funny when you say little ones with a Louisiana pine snake, the largest baby North American colubrid. But anywho, what's your style for keeping an adult or a sub-adult?
So for an adult, I have boaphile cages, 5x2s, and I have a stack of those where my largest adults go. The black pines get a little bigger than the Louisianas, but Louisianas get bigger than you realize. And like a lot of my buyers end up being people who were boa people before. And they've kind of gotten out of boa. They want to go to colubrids, and they want the closest thing they can get. And so that kind of space wise, I think a 5x2 is good for the adults. Each one gets its own cage. You can keep pits together, but the problem I've noticed over the years, if you do, is the male will hog the best hot spots. I don't keep them together for that reason, except for during breeding season, which we can talk about in a minute. But so I keep them 5x2s. Now I have some of my Louisianas are not quite as big. Some of them are 4.5 feet, maybe, I don't know, 1,600 grams, 1,500 grams. Those animals can go in a CB70, and they do fine. And then I have like black pines up till, a couple years old, maybe 3 years old. I grow mine slow. So that I don't rush them to maturity, any of my pines. But so some of my black pines will stay in that CB70. So I have a nice tall CB70 rack, and then I have the stack of the 5x2s. I keep my adults having such a nice big cage. I set up one side with the hides and with newspaper and the hotspot, and then I set up the other side with aspen. And it's hit or miss, but they'll usually eat on the side with their hide, and that way I avoid them ingesting the aspen. Or I even use pine sometimes too. I know there used to be this thing about don't use pine, but I use pine sometimes without problem. But they will usually use the restroom on the side with the shavings more times than not. So what you got here is you got a gravid female, and she's actually in a nesting box. And I use a 32-quart tub for her nesting box, and you can see that's a big snake filling up a 32-quart tub.
Yeah.
She's a Theron Majors, bred to an Eric Richter Louisiana pine. And so she's a big girl. She's 5.5 foot maybe, but she's heavy. She weighs over 2,000 grams. And she produces big babies. Her babies, she's produced several babies that were over 100 grams, and 22, 24 inches long at hatching, like massive babies.
That's insane. Cool.
You want me to talk about each picture as it comes up, or do you want to talk about
you just go with what you're going, and he'll pop up some pictures. Yeah.
Okay. So that's how I usually set up my adults. I'm a little terrified of them ingesting the substrate, and so I try to feed them on the newspaper. Of course, I feed them with tongs. My adults, I use Ultratherm pads.
Yeah.
Hooked to a thermostat. I like the Ultratherm on that boaphile because they'll only get to a certain temp. I don't worry about them overheating, and they're pretty low wattage for pads. So I use those. I brought a guy in to put in extra ventilation. I use a gentleman named Chris Salisbury, the Gorgon's Head, out here in Statesville, North Carolina. He came in and he put extra ventilation in my boaphile cages because the pines, they like a lot of ventilation. They like low humidity. I use really small water dishes, considering the size of the snake, because I'm trying to, again, keep my humidity fairly low within the cage. Pines they appreciate a lower humidity.
I want to talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
Have you found any kind of negative consequences if the humidity kind of bulks up? Because back in the day, here's the origin of that story or that question. Pituophis, I've said this a couple times. I love my kings. Everybody knows that. But Pituophis are like my first love when it comes to North American colubrids. And I had aspirations here of having a big old pit collection. And make a long story short, they just all kind of dropped one after another once they got to be adults. And I kind of came to the realization, it was actually after we had the guy on that wrote the Sublock book, and I can't remember his name right now.
Dustin Rhodes.
Dusty Rhodes, there you go. And he was Clint and I were like talking about how we get sublocks to die, and then he said, well, it's ventilation. And then I was like, oh, that's probably what was going on with those pits. So now the pits I have are in this room in these like big old, the stack that's right over here. And I added a bunch of ventilation. So did you see any evidence that like your humidity went up and then you got respiratory infections or anything like that?
No, but I have heard, I'd never let it get there, but I've heard other people tell me that like in their particular snake room, the humidity was so high that they couldn't keep pits because they would get respiratory infections. I did have an interesting situation where I had someone had kept one of the pines on a bioactive setup where the moisture was a little high, and it went into these really frequent sheds where it would like go from one shed to the next shed to the next shed. And I don't know if you guys realize this with your pits, but the sheds take a little bit more out of a pine snake than it does out of a king snake because the skin is thicker on the pine snake.
It's keratinized.
Yes, so I don't feed my pines when they're opaque. They probably would eat when they're opaque. Some of them would, but a lot of times if you try to feed them when they're opaque, they'll regurge because I think it's just taking so much energy for them to work through that shed.
That makes sense.
And so I have seen someone keep one in a bioactive, and it was too the moisture level, the humidity was too much, and it just went through I want to say 6 shed cycles in a row. And of course I got it back somewhere in that process. It stopped eating. And then it still just I kept it on newspaper, and then it just kept going through cycles. And it finally, at some point, it settled down, and it started to kind of improve. But I'm sure that it would have continued to decline if kept in that situation. So they just don't they don't like a lot of moisture.
And that's both of them. The loading eye and the roofing eye.
Absolutely. And so in my CB70s that I keep my sub adults or my smaller adults in, I melted. I use a soldering iron, and I melted literally thousands of holes into my tub. So it's almost like I wish I had sent you a picture. Everywhere there could be a hole, there's a hole on all 4 sides, because I just want maximum airflow. And then I use water dishes that are literally 2 or 3 inches across in a CB70 tub. Because I just really minimize that. Another thing that does is it keeps the snake from defecating in the water bowl because he can't aim well enough to hit it. And I'm a little afraid of, infections and things like that from the snakes drinking, the filthy water. And I'd much rather have a small dish. Again, I keep my collection so small, I can refill that dish a couple times a week and it's no problem. If I had 1,000 snakes, I couldn't do that. But I keep the dishes really small, and that seems to help. And for for my younger snakes, I have like for, I don't know, 6 months up to a year and a half, or 6 months up to a year. I keep those in like 16 quarts, and I melt all the holes out in those 16, and then they go to a 32. And my hatchlings and my hatchling rack, same thing. I just melt as many holes as I can.
Cool. I found with the ventilation too, with the racks. I have racks here where I have sea serpent racks that are open, so there's not a PVC, kind of like a vision rack.
Yeah.
And then I have other racks that are like a wall of PVC, and the tub kind of goes in. And I have definitely found same temperature, same everything. The racks that are open stay nice and dry because of all the excess ventilation. And then those racks that are walled off, completely encompassed, they become like these swampy, wet, disgusting things on occasion.
Yeah.
When it's June and July here, that's when my humidity is like at its peak. And my Floridana love that because they're humid.
Yeah.
But my Splendida, the Desert Kings, they're in the open racks. But it's just kind of a neat little example of how like not all racks are created equal. I have one black pine that was given to me that lives here, and he's in one of those open racks because of the ventilation issue, and he's been doing great.
That's good.
When I had the pits crash, they were in racks, the same racks that are down there right now growing up, and they were the walled off racks. So I think it just got way too wet.
Well, remember, that's something I've mentioned before, that I think it doesn't even have to be an arid species. That in racks, there can be big ventilation issues even for species that need humidity, because too often we sacrifice airflow for humidity.
Yeah.
And that's where we get this stagnant air that causes problems. So I'm with you. I've not done nearly as many air holes in my CB70 racks as probably I should for some of these species. But I've got 28 quart racks that smaller species or younger animals are in. And just pop all over that because of that very reason. I think that they just need that flow. And in fact, it's even something we've discussed doing we call it the Southwest room because it's where we keep like the Alterna and Subox and things that, again, need, less humidity. Not only do we have the holes in the racks, but I've thought about putting fans in there just to help push air into those racks and move it out even more, because I think they need it. I think it's one of the reasons I struggle with Subox without, just having mediocre success, on them. And same thing with these, where it goes further than these species, I guess is what I'm saying, that the need for that airflow, and how important that is.
Yeah. And whatever you keep, you just adjust to whatever that animal needs. Like, for my Stewarts, I might melt a lot of holes on one side of the tub and then no holes on the other side of the tub. So there's a little bit of a gradient across a 32 quart tub. And then I'll use cypress mulch, and I may put a moist hide in. And so I try to give options, and I know we all try to do that, but that's one of the fascinating things about keeping snakes is they're all a little bit different. And then I think when if someone were to decide that, hey, I want to specialize on this one or two types of animal, like what I've done, then you really get to know them, and you really kind of hone in on that husbandry and what they need, both as individual animals and as a species. And I think it makes it just, you're never gonna know it all. You're never gonna learn it all. There's always more to learn,
Absolutely.
Cool. Okay, so
if I could just wrap up on the keeping the smaller animals, I do keep my hatchlings on newspaper, and I keep them on newspaper until they're about a year old.
Really? And why is that? I'm just curious.
They can find the food. I can make sure the food did get lost in some bedding somewhere. I feel like I can keep it a little more sterile for them with the newspaper. They don't make as big a mess as the big snakes either, which makes it a little bit easier to clean up. Versus a big snake on newspaper, you got a lot of cleanup to do. So I will kind of do that, and I don't push my babies. I start them on rat pinks, and I don't increase the size of the meal until the following spring. And I'll kind of nudge up to a rat fuzzy, and I'm very slow in the first year. Like I don't push my pines at all because they'll eat as much as you give them.
Yeah.
And I almost, if anything, I'm probably slower than most when it comes to raising. A piece of that, when you think about the longevity of the species, is there are only so many of these brought out of the wild to come into captive populations. And so if I really want to be successful, or if I want this animal to be successful long term, I need to keep these guys alive as long as I possibly can. Because if I'm not trying to turn them around and create new genes, because the more generations I go, the more bottlenecking I'm going to run into. And so I feel like it's in the best, if I can keep my animals alive and healthy and producing for 20 or 25 or even 30 years, I've done that animal really great, not just animal, but that species a great service to keep fresh genetics for generations down the road to be able to see these things. And so I really try to take it slow with them. I don't rush them because I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to beat anybody to the market on these guys. And so that's part of my approach as well.
Yeah, I don't think you need to. I mean, there's not a lot of guys that are bringing these to the market,
True.
So that's good. You talked about starting off on rat pinks. Do you feed just primarily rats to whether it's babies, adults, subadults, or do you do any kind of mixing, or what's that look like?
That's a great question.
And what's your frequency? How often are you feeding?
Okay. I feed once a week. There's times, as you're trying to acquire rodents and the prices of rodents and different things kind of happen over time. I may go in and have a place that's selling hamsters on special, and I may sub out hamsters for rats at times. I may mix in chicks certain time of year. One thing I notice is my males, like 100% of the time, my males go off feed in the spring when they smell an ovulating female in the room. And so, one of the things I do is I bring my males up 2 weeks early, my adult males, and I go ahead and try to get a meal or two in them before I ever bring the females out. Because they're mostly not going to eat, but every once in a while I can get a male who won't eat a rat to take a chick. And so I'll keep chicks on hand to or quail. I've kept quail in the past to kind of mix in, but I don't make it a point of varying the diet a lot. I don't really do mice at all. If you ever look at a pine snake that was raised on mice next to a pine snake that was raised on rats, there's a remarkable difference. These are big snakes. They need a lot of calories. And those rats, they have a lot more fat, a lot more calories. And so, I think rats, if not rats, hamsters. I've fed rabbits before. I've got a friend out here locally who breeds rabbits, and every once in a while, the mother rabbit will neglect the babies, and I'll say, "Hey, throw them in the freezer for me if they die." And so he'll, bring me rabbits, and I see the most aggressive feeding response out of baby rabbits.
Sure,
anything that I fed them, and those Louisianans go nuts over rabbits. So do the black pines. And so no, I try to keep it within those. I try to keep it rats, but again, sometimes if I'm looking at rats and the size of rats some of these guys eat, sometimes it makes sense to pick up hamsters, and I'll mix that in.
Cool. I think a lot of these heavier bodied snakes, like this in the wild, there's squirrels that they're getting a hold of. There's bigger rodents that they're getting a hold of than mice. That's just where our minds go. And they're packing those calories in. I mean, I found big black rat snakes with young squirrels. That they just swallowed. So it absolutely happens. There's a lot of ground fowl out there too.
Yeah, they love that kind of stuff. I'll tell you. So we have some of the nicest black rat snakes in the whole country where I live. I live on the eastern side of the foothills. And like even in my neighborhood here, we have black rat snakes that have black bellies. Like they're gorgeous.
Oh wow.
But what I tell people is like they'll think about, you keep black snakes. And what I tell you is you could take 4 of our black rat snakes and fit it inside of my adult female black pine snake. Like it's a whole different type of snake. Like people see these things and they're like, that's not like a North American snake, is it? Like it's just such a bulky, big snake. It's just so unusual to see a snake this size, but I believe that's how you feed them as well. And like I said, I feed them once a week. I feed my males are going to be off feed for 2 or 3 months. Anytime there's a female in the room, they're not eating, but when they come back with a vengeance. You have to kind of watch the tubs when you open them. But my females get 150 grams a week. I weigh their food, and they get 150 grams of rats per week. And I buy my rats. Most of my rats come from a local guy, and so when I have to buy from a distributor, it's overflow because I just need more than what he's producing at the time. But and so there's times when I buy from a local, he might give me a rat that's 275 grams. And these guys are so big, they'll eat that and you won't even notice a lump. I just don't make it a habit of feeding them 275 grams every week. You know, I try to, but I don't want to go less than 150, especially on my females. And so I weigh their food every week.
And so the adults are getting a prey item once a week?
Yes.
Well?
My males less often. If I overfeed my males and they get too heavy, they're not good breeders anymore. And so they get smaller rats, 100 grams or less. And I might feed them because keep in mind they have that long fast. So I don't want them to get too thin, but I might feed them every 2 or 3 weeks. I don't feed the males as much because I have found out through the years, I used to keep Florida Kings also, and I loved them. Like they're awesome snakes. And everybody has that big male Florida King that just eats anything that nobody else eats.
Yeah.
Those guys are never good breeders.
They suck at breeding.
Yeah, they're just too big, and they're too their bellies are full. They're just chilling. They're just waiting to eat again. And I've seen that in so many different types of snakes. I try to keep my males lean and mean, and I try to make sure my females get consistent, healthy, heavy meals because their eggs are absolutely massive. And I'm getting big clutches. Here you go. Look at in this picture, look at my foot behind there. I wear a size 11. And that's my foot. And that's one clutch of eggs from my black pine snake this year. That's what she laid 15 of those eggs. And those babies all weighed between 60 and 65 grams when they hatched.
Wow.
And so that was one clutch of her eggs. So you got to feed a snake to be able to for it. And she's done that there she is again. She's done that 3 years in a row. And I'm trying I want to give her the year off because I know that's a lot of eggs. But my fear, and I've talked to a lot of other folks who are more experienced than I am, and my fear is that if I don't pair her next year, then she's going to lay slugs, and I'm more worried about the slugs getting stuck than I would be a fertile egg getting stuck. Because I
run into that with false water cobras. I tried to give them a break, and it didn't work. They laid slug clutches, and the only time I've run into any kind of egg binding is I had a slug get stuck in one of the females. Now it only got stuck for 2 days, and then which might not have been stuck, but after that, you definitely start thinking about that when you start breeding colubrids, which is they get into that pattern, and then it's kind of like because I think in this is my theory anyway. In captivity, it's such a perfect place. The food's coming every week. The temperatures are perfect or close to perfect as they're going to get, that they can quite literally get into a pattern of reproduction that they don't get in the wild because it's hard being a wild snake. So, they drop their eggs. They may not have eaten that much before they had that clutch. They lay a little clutch, but then they don't have those fat bodies and resources. So it doesn't kind of kick this cycle into play. But we've ran into that with corns here at the university. I had some kings that I didn't breed. Yeah. So I do think that's a very good point you bring up, which is what the hell do you do once you initiate these cycles with these females, giving them a year off?
Yeah, you want to because you don't want to keep pushing them. But, I'm afraid. If I give them a year off, they're going to lay slugs. And then, we're going to have issues there and bigger issues. Yep. And so I've got there's several guys that have kind of mentored me over the years. I'd mentioned Dr. Beaker. There's a gentleman named Rusty Rollins who's an old school breeder, and he's taught me a lot about breeding the pits. And Tony Dungaris helped me a lot with different. And one of the things Tony had suggested was, you just feed them, and if they're gonna cycle, they're gonna cycle, and let the snake kind of make the decision for what it wants to do, and just pay. And that was really good advice, and I've done that, and it so far so good. It works.
Cool. Well, nice. Let's segue into breeding.
Okay.
Do you have something else, Clint?
No, that's exactly where I was going. 100%. I love it.
Okay. Yeah. So I've actually produced one clutch of loading eye, which they were the school's animals. They were brought. I always bring them down here to the infamous garage I talk about on the podcast. And I've always loved black pines. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to keep these down here just for this season to see if I can get a clutch. And it was pretty straightforward. But I also sit and think, did I just happen to like stumble onto this? I think about that all the time whenever it just works, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So just kind of walk us through your process.
Okay. So I think when people struggle with pines, the first thing is that I have noticed is the inbreeding depression as an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so to try to get as unrelated of animals as possible is probably your first goal. And that's hard to do with some of these guys, but I think getting unrelated animals, preferably from unrelated lineages, is going to be your best first step. And then, I think a good long brumation. I brumate in my garage, average temps around 50. That's what I'm shooting for. Sometimes it drops to 38. Sometimes it goes to 64, because I'm in North Carolina and sometimes we have warmer winters, and I'd let it fluctuate. I think that's good for the animals. If it looks like it's going to get below 38 in my garage, which is rare, I'll bring them in for the night because I don't want them to freeze. But that's, like I said, that's rare. That's when it's like 9 degrees outside for like 3 days in a row. That really doesn't happen here, but once every 15 years or so. So a nice brumation. I stop feeding my snakes at Halloween. I put them down at Thanksgiving, and I bring them up on St. Patty's. Okay. So they get almost 4 months at around, give or take, 45 to 55 degrees in my garage. Check on them every week or two, make sure they got water, kind of make sure they're not, any issues with them, which they rarely do. My snakes come out of brumation usually looking better than they did going in. I don't know how that happens. And so I bring them up. Like I said, I bring my males up 2 weeks before I bring my females up to try to get a meal or two into them, because as soon as they smell the girls, they're not going to eat. And then when I bring my females up, I go ahead and introduce right off the bat. I give them like a day or two to adjust. I try to get a meal in them, and then they, a day or two after the meal, I go ahead and start introducing them. I use a 5 on 2 off schedule with my snakes, and so I put them together for 5. I pair them for 5. I separate them and feed them. And then I leave them apart for 2, and then I put them back for 5. And I don't mix my male because I'm very specific to want to, I want to know that when I'm offering someone a pair, that they know the lineage of their pair. Mm-hmm. And so I don't like put multiple males with a female or anything like that. I just, one pair goes for that year, and that's the pairing for that year. But that pair will go back 5 on 2 off. One of the things I learned years ago breeding king snakes was I was always afraid of them eating each other. And so I never left them together long enough, and I would mistake ovulation for being gravid. And so even after she looks gravid, I still give them one more go. And even after she has what turns out to be her pre-lay shed, I'll still put him in one more time. And usually he won't do anything with her at that point, and I know. But I miss so many. I'm probably the world's worst king snake breeder, because I missed so many years of kings. I had Pinellas. I had all kind of cool king snakes back in the day. But I missed so many years because I was afraid to just let them be. And then I would, you see that female swell up, and I'd think, she's gravid. I'm good to go. And then she absorbs because I never paired them again. And so I don't make that mistake anymore. I keep them together. And so they stay together throughout until right before she lays, just with that 5 on 2 off schedule. And that seems to work really well. You get, like I said, sometimes if you've got a really, really line bred animal, it won't produce. And I've had some males that didn't produce. And so when those males don't produce, I usually gift those out, those adult males out. But my producers, like I've been really fortunate. Like my hatch rates are around 100%. Like I've done well with that.
Nice.
I give my females a big 32 quart or larger nesting box. So they have this huge nesting box, and I get that peat moss from Lowe's and kind of stuff it pretty full with that. I melt a hole in the top. That's actually not a nesting box. That's an incubation box, which I had to end up taking them out of that because you can see how many eggs there were. It was too many eggs for that size box. But they dig out these really neat chambers to lay their eggs in. If you give them a really big box, and I wondered if part of the process of digging is part of what helps condition them for laying those huge eggs. And so another thing I start doing with my females in the spring when they come up is I start bringing them outside for a day or two each week and just letting them crawl around in my front yard one at a time, letting them absorb some UV. I'll walk up on them and get their tail and kind of make them pull against me and different things like that because I want them to get all that exercise because they got to pass some huge eggs. And so I want to make sure they're fairly fit to be able to pass those huge eggs. And so I do those kind of things. And again, you got a small collection, you can do that. If I had 1,000 snakes, there's no way I could ever do it.
But this is, I love hearing this. I mean, this is to know that you're working with species that are, in peril, and there's few of them out there. And to hear the detail of which you're going into to ensure success with this is very admirable. I mean, I love hearing this.
Thank you. I enjoy the process, and I'm very, my wife would say OCD. And so so it works to be that meticulous, because it soothes something in my brain to do that stuff,
Yeah.
But so they dig out these really big nesting chambers, and then I get their eggs out. But one of the things I had a lot of people ask me questions about this year was they saw some of my eggs, and they noticed that I had the eggs buried in the moss, in the incubation boxes. And the reason for that is if I give them those huge chambers, sometimes they lay their eggs vertically. And so they'll be clustered vertically. And so they don't lay out nice and flat in a box. So what I do in that case is, I line the bottom with the moss. I put the eggs in, and then I cover the eggs with the moss. And again, I still had 100% hatch rates.
Do your lay boxes, are they clear or are
they're opaque?
They're opaque.
They're
you
not
also
solid,
have that. So they're a solid color, or light can get through them?
They're opaque. Light can get through, but you can't really see through them. They're not clear. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But you also have it chock full of substrate, right?
Yes. And they'll push the substrate up against the side, so they make it dark the way they do the substrate.
Well,
so you see what I'm saying?
Yep. No. Props to Dr. Whitman.
But there's a reason he's asking this.
At Colubrid Fest, we had an egg binding talk, and I don't know if you realize it or not, but you're doing literally what the good doctor said, which is his whole idea was that we give our snakes just kind of a clear box and then throw a little sphagnum in there, and they freak out because laying eggs in nature, you want to make sure you're secretive and, and they're not going into big cavities. So what you just described completely validated what Whitman said at Colubrid Fest, which is
awesome. Yeah,
put a lot of substrate in there, make it so you can't see in. And in this case, even though it's opaque, you got all that peat moss or whatever in there. That's going to
push it up against the sides. Yeah,
block line of sight when they push it up against.
Yep.
And he also mentioned the chambers, which you just talked about, and that they lay vertically. So everything that Dr. Whitman talked about is happening with these snakes at your house.
That's so cool, man. I love that. I love that.
And I think the quote was, "Friends don't let friends use clear nest boxes."
So this was luck. This was, I would say it was luck of the draw, but you know what it was is from about 2004 to 2012. I think I messed up so many clutches, and I had so many breeding issues in my early years. I think there were little adjustments I made without even realizing I was making them. But I'll talk to friends who are just starting to breed, and they'll, oh man, I had these snakes that hatched out this way, or these didn't hatch, or this. I'm like, yeah, I did all that. Like I screwed up everything I could have screwed up for the first 6 or 8 years I did this, no doubt about it. And so I'd probably switched to this without realizing I'd switched to it.
That's cool. So let's talk just a little bit about what's up on the screen. If you're watching YouTube, if you're in your car, we have a picture of Ruthveni eggs. So these animals are infamous, I think is the correct word, for the size of these eggs and the size of the babies that come out. I am very much looking forward to one day seeing that image in real life. But how big are these eggs, and how many do they produce?
So again, I have big clutches, man. My black pine lays 15. She's laid 15, 14, and 15 the last 3 years.
Wow.
And that's unusual for a black pine. Those are huge clutches. My Louisianas will lay, I'd say between maybe 5 and 7. I had one clutch that laid 9. That's the largest I've had on Louisiana. And so the first thing that people will say, because there's this big controversy around Louisiana is like 25 years ago, because nobody knew what one looked like. And people were breeding northern pines to bull snakes and saying they had Louisianas. But the telltale is not necessarily the number of edges in the clutch, because even Terry V will tell you he's had some bigger clutches now of 8 and 9 eggs. And I think as the husbandry gets better, they lay bigger clutches because you've got a better food supply and those kind of things. That makes sense. But the way to know that you've got Louisianas is the weight of the hatchling when it hatches out.
Okay.
Because you got 100-gram hatchling, you can mix anything else you want to mix, and you're not going to end up with 100-gram hatchling from it.
Yeah.
Unless it's a Burmese python. These eggs are the same size as Burmese python eggs, and the babies are the same size as Burmese babies.
Wow. And
so they are absolutely massive. But it's kind of like, it blows your mind because like the snake in this picture is about 4.5 feet long. She might be 1,500 grams, and she's laying these monster eggs.
So when they get done laying, do they just look completely wrecked?
Oh man, they have a hard time, and that's the thing. Like they have a really hard time. They really do. And so what I try to do is I try to catch them within 24 hours and offer them like a little rat crawler or something like that. I want a little more than a pinky or a fuzzy, but I need a little cat. And I try to catch them just when they come out of that kind of daze that they're in when they lay, and get something in them right away. And sometimes they'll take it, sometimes they won't, but I really try. And I'm always hopeful when that does happen. But if not, I try to get something in them within a couple days. And you can usually tell, like my big female black pine, she's just an absolute beast, man. She'll lay 15 eggs, and like 4 days later, she's going to eat like 100-gram rat. Like, she doesn't care. But I've had some other ones that they won't eat for a month, and you think you're going to lose them because they look so rough. They're so worn out. This particular animal, she struggled. The first year she tried to double clutch, and I didn't reintroduce her. But she tried to double clutch, and it just took a lot out of her. And the next spring, I fed her. I did the best I could with her. I brumated her. And then the next spring, she just sat on her hot spot for a month. It didn't eat, didn't do anything. I talked to Tony Dongera about her, and it was a project Tony and I had together. This was actually one of Tony's animals. And he said, look, take her water bowl away for a week. And then at the end of that week, offer her a fuzzy with a little bit of vitamin, mineral, calcium supplement on top of it. And man, it worked like a charm. She ate. And then, I did that again a week later. She ate again. And then she jumped right back on her rats. And man, I'm telling you, she didn't get maybe 2 meals in her, and she's ovulating again. And she bounced right back. She's ready to go. And so, like, she's fantastic. She's laid good clutches 3 years in a row. But it does answer your question. It hits them hard. It takes a lot out of them. You can see how big the eggs are in comparison to the animal.
Yeah. Kind of gives them that deflated tire.
It does.
Look at the end.
Yeah, it really does. And, you try to bring them back, and that's part of that process of just working with them and enjoying them. And they bounce back. I had a friend come over a few weeks ago to purchase a pair from me, and then wanted to see my adults. And I was like, look, they're still recovering. And we're in, October now. I think he came over in September, and I was like, they're still recovering. They're not back to their full size yet. And they won't be until next spring. So it takes a lot.
Good golly.
Yeah.
So once we get the eggs, what's incubation look like?
Oh, great question. So for years and years, I was put my eggs in a cooler on the back porch incubator. And that worked really well. The summers are unpredictable. Yeah, there you go. See, there's the picture. Look, and you can see how big the egg is. Yeah, it's like a Burmese python egg.
That egg is almost the size of like a baseball. I mean, it's big.
It's huge, man. And that's like, and every bit of that's going to be a baby snake coming out. They're massive. So the eggs come out. If they separate like that one did, I can lay them flat in a container. I use like a sphagnum moss that I get, or a peat moss that I get from Lowe's. I soak it, then I wring all the water out, and then I put them there, and then I get the long strand fiber sphagnum, and I wring that water out and lay that on top. You have to be really careful with the Pituophis eggs because they're so big. You don't want them to dry out. on top because the snake can't cut through if they dry out. And then again, my big clusters, I put them in and actually cover them with the moist peat. I do put air holes in my incubation containers because I want some oxygen in and out.
Yep.
And so I may put 6 or 8 air holes around that. I do want that airflow. So I used to do it this way. Now I have an incubator. Again, I got from my friend Chris Salisbury at the Gorgon's Head. He built me one a few years ago, and I use it. I set it on 80 or 82. There were some studies done on northern pines, I think, in the Pine Barrens, maybe back in the 80s. And they looked at incubation tips and then the survival behaviors of the hatchling. And I think that was the most successful range, that 80 to 82 range. And so I keep it in there when I incubate there. And maybe 65 days, something like that. Seems like they usually hatch about 65 days at that.
Okay. And then baby comes out. We already kind of talked about basic husbandry of the tubs. What's your idea or philosophy on feeding the babies? Do you wait like a month and let them digest eggs? Or are they just as easy to feed as most Pituophis? Or are these guys a pain in the butt to get started? Or
great questions. Great questions. So the first thing, I have this philosophy about pine snakes. And they have, I don't think they're conscious in their stress response. Okay. And you probably see this in the hogs too. I don't think they see you and be like, oh, you're messing with me, so I'm going to do this to scare you away. I don't think they can't think on that level. They have some kind of spike in stress hormones. And so their body reacts the way they react when they're stressed. So I try to minimize my stress in my hatchlings. And I think what that does is that you end up with better behaved adults as a result that are more chill as adults. And so I think if you do that across generations, you get some pretty laid back pine snakes across generations. You get healthier, more laid back pines. So I actually will leave them in their incubation box, and I will sit their incubation box inside of a tub and just crack the lid. And that way they can come out when they're ready. Gotcha. And I try to do that whenever that's possible. And again, I'm trying to minimize stress to the animals as they're starting out life. And I try to minimize stress on my females too. So my females I let them do their thing, and when they're done, I go get the eggs. I don't like take each egg as it goes or anything. I'm like, I want to minimize their stress through the whole process. So my babies do their thing. They usually stay in their incubation box or until they shed. And then they come out, see all the sheds, they shed. You're so anxious to want to feed them that you tend to want to feed them early because they have this ton of yolk that they're kind of born with. But the Louisianas will usually eat right after they shed. And it's close to 100% on the Louisianas. They eat frozen thawed. They start on frozen thawed pink rats. And the black pines seem to take about an extra week or so. But again, they all do the same thing. They start on, I guess they hold the yolk a little bit longer, but then they start right off on frozen thawed pink rats. That's one of the things, like I said, back in the day, I used to breed things like Scarlet Kings and Mole Kings and Eastern Kings and things like that. And man, those things are a lot of work to start babies.
You know, they are.
Particularly like the Mole King and the Scarlet King, man, you're talking like that's an uphill battle.
Scarlet, wow.
Yeah, it's chicken hearts, and the Mole Kings is mouse tails, And so as I got older, I was like, I just don't want to deal with that anymore. These guys are easy. You just give them enough time to digest the yolk, and you just toss in a frozen thawed rat, and they just go. Like there's no question. They're just easy. And
every pit that's hatched here, I've hatched finnis, snoring gophers, and bulls, and black pines, and every time this is what happens, because I usually will do like one clutch of each. There's a ton of king snakes here that are chosen death. Yeah. And then I get the Pituophis clutch, and it's just like boom, 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 eat. And I literally have the moment you just talked about, which is like, what the hell? Why do I like these things? Like these things are just easy. They just eat. Like the false water cobras. I have a clutch of them right now where I'm just doing an experiment and I'm keeping all the babies together. And when I open the tub, they line up, like their little heads pop up, and because I'm force feeding them, and I'm literally above them are all the kings, and I'm just like, why? Like, why do you do this to yourself? So
Oh,
anyway,
I've been there so
my
many
experience
years.
is
Yeah, I've been there as well. Exactly. I had a friend who does a lot of work outdoors and whatnot, and he found a pair of Eastern Kings in Wilkes County copulating maybe about 5 years ago, and as you get to the edge of the foothills in North Carolina, you get these really nice jet black Eastern Kings with really thin bands and a really high band count, and they're pretty. They look like the New Jersey Eastern Kings as you get up here.
Yeah.
Ironically enough, our milk snakes here in the foothills look like the New Jersey coastal plains milks also, as you get right along that edge. And so there might be something to that. We can talk about that offline at some point if you want. But yeah, really sweet pair. And so he grabbed those up for me. He said, "Hey, I grabbed these for you. I know you're into this sort of thing." And so I hatched out the clutch, and I think we had one out of the whole clutch start on pinks. Everything else, they didn't even want scented stuff. They wanted live baby snakes.
No.
And man, it was like, God, that's impossible, unless I quit my job and just start hunting for baby worm snakes and red bellied snakes. I just can't keep up a clutch of those,
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah. Thank you. So more of the story is not only are these things wonderful, but they're pretty easy to start, which I think that should push any taxa up for a colubrid keeper if the babies are just easy. So
yeah. The biggest thing with them is you can't overfeed them because they will eat as much as you give them. And so you gotta pace them, and as far as how much you feed them.
Yep. All right. Well, we've kind of covered all that. I do want to talk just a little bit about lineages.
Yeah.
Because that's with species that have such a narrow gene pool. Even if you're not into locality, even if you're not into lineages, you're really not doing these animals a favor if you go out and get siblings, and then breed them, and then throw those kind of out into the gene pool, because the ability to outcross is minimal. So, if we can do the, why don't Max, if you're listening, just put up a picture. Let's do the Ruth and I first, the Louisianas of the adults, and then we'll just let Michael talk about what lineage we're looking at. Holy hell. Well, there's probably two of them there, but
there's two of them. Picture? Yeah. Okay. So you see the big dark one. Her parents were a Theron Majors, bred to an Eric Richter animal, and Eric got his animals directly from Terry Vandeventer. Theron Majors, I believe, worked at Northwest Louisiana State University, and he was able to obtain some of his own stock. Cool. So that's a big female. She is from those two, and she's a magnificent animal. And then the other animal
real quick before you move to the other one, for those who can't see this animal that he just described, to me, it's similar looking to a northern pine, just not clean white. Instead, it's got a little more yellow.
Looks a lot like Kentucky's.
Yeah. So it's just, I like to try to give a visual for those who can't see it.
No, that's great. Yeah, it's like a really stocky Kentucky. And the other animal, the really bright yellow, was bred by Casey Lazick. Is that how you pronounce his last name? And I traced the lineage on that animal. There's a gentleman named Mark LaChain in Canada who purchased, I want to say, 16 of those directly from Terry Vandeventer around 30 years ago. He saw an ad in Reptiles magazine and reached out to Terry directly and purchased a bunch of those up in Canada. And so Mark was the person who obtained those from Terry. And of course, one thing I'll do is I'll reach, like I've asked Terry, and Terry's confirmed that, Mark bought a bunch of those from me. And then there's people in between Casey and Mark. But I have a list of all those individuals as well. Tony Dongera did a lot of that homework in order to get some of that information. I think I've sent you a lot of that stuff, Zach, as far as the details of the in-between folks. So that's those two.
Animal that we have is a LASIK line at the university.
Okay.
So are there main lines for these? Like if you're getting into Louisiana pines, are there like the three main lines, or are there just literally rando pairs across the country that have constituted the outcrossing?
Terry Vandeventer contributed most of the animals that are in the hobby right now. And
Cool.
this is from 30 years ago. I think he stopped selling to private sector because folks were messing around and inbreeding or crossbreeding some other things into the lines, and he didn't like it. So he some of the original animals. And then Theron Majors was able to, through some of his work at Northwest Louisiana State, was able to secure some animals. KJ Lodridge, I don't know if you all remember him from the early King Snake days.
I do.
He was able.
I remember chatting with KJ when I was in college.
Okay, so he was able to secure some. Actually, yeah, and I've reached out to him as well, and so I have an animal that is from his lineage as well, by way of a gentleman named Carl Gilmore at Suffolk Selects, and then John Ginter and Mike Monlazoon, they each had wild caught animals, and Ginter bred those together in 2014. I was able to get an F1 from that pairing by way of a gentleman named Jim Godfrey, that John had gifted a male to, and I was able to use that male in some of my breedings a couple of years ago. And so those are your kind of 4 main lines that are out there. There are a few other lines that people say they've picked up here and there, but you don't hear as much about that. And there may be a few others out there. Gotcha. But those are the four that people really talk about.
Let's move on to loading eye then.
Okay.
The Black Pines. Just go with the main lines, and we'll just throw pictures up.
Okay, so the animal you're looking at here is an Eric Richter animal. I don't know where Eric got his stock from, but his line are some of the darker, the darker Black Pines that are out there. So I have a breeder male from him. Then Dave Boyles had some animals that were National Zoo animals. And then so I have my big female is actually a National Zoo bred to a Cincinnati Zoo animal. And so I've got a big female in my group that is about 6.5 feet long and weighs about 2,500 grams. And she's the one that produces those big clutches. I think the key, and then I have some Kentucky Reptile Zoo stock as well. And the Kentucky Reptile Zoo stock have a little more pattern towards the tail. They're a little different.
Okay.
Let's see. If you keep going, you'll see one that has like a little pattern to it. Keep going one more to the right. There's 3 of them together. It makes a great picture. All right. See the one with the pattern towards the tail? Now these are all young of the year snakes that were taken last year, but you can see the differences in the pattern. And in the offspring, even though most of these guys will turn solid black as adults, the offspring really will tell a tale of the different lineages when you look at them. You see, because you got, you can see some real distinct differences. And a lot of folks want Black Pines that are black right out of the egg. And I hatch a lot of those, but that's not my goal. My goal is the most diverse stock that I can kind of put out there. You don't see other people breeding Black Pines and producing 15 babies or having 6.5 foot long Black Pines as often. One, because they feed them mice instead of rats, but 2, the inbreeding impacts the adult size of the animal at some point in time. And so I think by having nice diverse lineages, you're going to get bigger, sturdier snakes. I have one other one that is not actually, it's in this photo. It's the bottom, the one stretched along the bottom here in this photo. Kevin Inge from Florida, he has a line there, and I was able to get some of his animals last year. And so I have 4 different lines represented in my group on the Black Pines also, and I'm looking for one more.
Holy hell.
Very nice.
This is fantastic. I just want to say, Michael, that this is colubrid keeping excellence.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Like knowing this level of detail and striving to outbreed to make sure that the animals are preserved for future people that want to get into it, and understanding the conservation, it's pretty damn inspiring stuff.
There's not anyone better whose hands these animals should be in.
That's really cool, man. I really appreciate that.
I mean, this is phenomenal.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I've had a lot, and this wouldn't happen without all the people that helped me make it happen. I mean, I think there's other folks that I've kind of talked to, and they kind of saw what I was shooting for, and and they've kind of stepped up and said, well, hey, I know somebody who's got this, and hey, I know somebody who's got that. And it's really helped to, like, this isn't something I could have done on my own or that sort of thing. Like, I had to have a lot of folks come in and say, hey, this is something that's worthwhile, and I want to help you do it. And so it's been really cool, man. It's a good thing. And hopefully, the ultimate goal is like what I did this year, Zac, with you with the Louisianas, is I want to be able to do that with Louisianas and Black Pines within a few years, where I'm sending out unrelated pairs to the right folks. And if we end up if every state had responsible keepers who had unrelated pairs of both, imagine what that does for these animals, 30, 50 years from now. It would be fantastic for them to kind of keep captive populations healthy.
I completely agree.
Yep.
Wow.
So we've covered it. Is there anything we didn't talk about with these animals that you want to kind of end on before we ask our final question?
I just emphasize the concept of irreplaceable animals in your collection. And because we all struggle, like, because we're collectors, and we see all these different animals we want to collect and keep, and we're fascinated by them because we love them. And you see something different and new, oh man, I want one of those. And so, you only have so much space. And so what's an irreplaceable animal? I think that's worthwhile. And as far as these particular animals go, they're just, they're wonderful captives. They get big, but they're still manageable. They're not quite as big as like your big boas and pythons, but they're big. They're bigger than most of the colubrids people keep. They're smart. They're diurnal. So you see them out, they're checking you out. They're coming to the front of their cages. They get to know you. They interact with you. Like I said before, they let you know when they don't like something, and you can't ask for better than that in a snake. He's going to hiss at you if he doesn't like something you're doing. Or she will hiss at you.
Yeah.
And they're great feeders. They're just wonderful animals all around to keep. Like I said, I've kept snakes for 40 years, and there's nothing that I enjoy keeping more than these animals.
I love it.
Yeah, I can speak to that. When I was building the collection at West Lib back, what year was this? This would have been in 2018, 19. Okay. Jen Joseph, our second guest ever on the podcast, and I were talking, and Jen's a wonderful human. And Kinsey Guthrie, she's a faculty member now at West Liberty, but she was my grad student back then. And she was our animal care specialist. So she was pulling double duty. I was trying to build a group of colubrids for her thesis. And of course, I am self-serving if I'm the one building the collection. And Jen was a Pituophis keeper. And I've already said they're my favorite. And so Jen graciously gifted us. I mean, it was an insane number of pits. I think it was 24. And it was great because she sent us some morph stuff. She sent us a pair of loading eyes. She sent us 2 male Ruthveni, bunch of bull snakes. It was just great. And so we get these animals, and of course they're stressed out, and everybody initially is pissed at me because I brought in these demon snakes. Like, literally, students were like, why the ones that yell at us? Like, what the hell is this growling crap? And I was like, you'll love them. Just, they got to settle in. It'll be fine. Fast forward, when I kept those Black Pines back here at my house just to give it a go with the breeding, this is what I get. Where are the Black Pines at? And I was like, oh, well, I'm going to keep them, and try to breed them. Well, aren't they coming back? I was like, they're coming back. I'm just going to, they'll get stressed out in our labs. I want to try to make more of them. Well, they're coming back, right? Like, the kids have bonded with these animals.
That's awesome.
And trust me, when they were gone, their absence was known because of their personalities, and they have personality. Like Pituophis, which is great, but the Black Pines in particular, they're cherished up at school. Like they're definitely among some of the best. Or not the best, but the students really like them.
Yeah, they're wonderful. They're really wonderful animals. Like I've kept Mexican Black Kings and Black Milks as well, and the Black Pines just in the class to itself.
Yep,
like
totally
it's just phenomenal. And so is Jennifer Joseph. She's one of my go-tos when I'm not sure what to do. She's one of the people I reach out to, and so I should have mentioned her earlier as well. She's if I'm not sure about something, I'll send her a message. She's super responsive and helpful.
Yeah, very cool. All right, so I'm very curious to hear your perspective on this, given the way you keep.
Yeah.
So our our final question that we ask is, everybody has a different perspective on the state of herpetoculture today, where herpetoculture in the private sector is going in the future, the good, the bad, the ugly, the positive, the negative, the neutral, the whatever. So what, for somebody that's so dedicated to taxa, and knows has this level of knowledge and passion, what is your view of herpetoculture's future in the private sector? Do you think we're under threat? We're not under threat. Just kind of let her rip.
Man, that's a great question. So yes, I do think we are under threat. I no longer keep native North Carolina species at all, because I noticed over the last few years the laws changed in all the surrounding states, and then North Carolina changed theirs as well. And I used to be a permit holder and all that kind of stuff for native species, but I just didn't want to deal with it anymore because the rules kept changing so often. And so I think, and there's still, North Carolina has some flexibility in that, where like a kid can catch a snake and keep a snake. And I think that's where it all started for the three of us. I think where it starts. Totally. So some of that's sensible. I'll give them that. But then there's just a lot of things that are just more strict, and there's different, so I think we are potentially at threat. I think we have to be responsible. I think, when you look at something like what I'm doing here with these guys, is being transparent with officials, working with, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, being very transparent and kind of showing them what my intentions are. I think we need spokespeople who are out front to kind of advocate for what we're doing. I think there are a lot of folks, you read about in the news right now doing really irresponsible things, and I think that hurts all of us.
Absolutely.
And so if there's a way to separate those folks from the group, and for the folks like the three of us and several other responsible keepers, if we can kind of find a way for us to be in the headlines and not the people who are doing irresponsible things, I think that's going to be a key. We just got to figure out how to do that. And so there needs to be some advocacy on that level. And it's really, like I said, from a conservation standpoint, and people to kind of stand up and get in front of folks, so we don't just have the folks making bad decisions being the ones in the news. I think I'm not a big morphs person. I don't really do a lot of morphs, but I think morphs have a real value because they draw the younger person in, or the person who might not understand anything about the loss of the longleaf pine habitat or the Baird's pocket gopher, but they might say, man, that's a really pretty snake, and that might start a fascination for somebody that develops into some of this stuff. So I think that all has a role, but yeah, I'm concerned about, some of the things I see in the media, with the, particularly people keeping venomous, and some of the things that draw negative attention to what we do. But before that, it was the giant boas and pythons that were drawing negative attention. So there's always going to be negative attention. I think we just have to have the positive people out front and let people see that, hey, this is a good thing, and we're trying to do good things for. It's sad, I grew up in a really rural area, and you could walk through the woods and find all these different animals, and the woods are going away now.
Right.
And like, you don't see a patch of woods without houses on the other side of it anymore. It's kind of heartbreaking. And I have 3 sons, and to think, their kids won't see a lot of the stuff that I saw. And so I think what we do in captive collections raises awareness that could potentially influence decisions later that protects habitat and protects animals. And so we've got to keep that out there.
100%.
Yeah, I completely agree. This has been a good one.
Yeah, thank you guys.
I've enjoyed this episode. Pit episodes are always fun for me because it's what I have the least amount of experience with, as far as the more commonly kept. And to go this in depth on just 2 species that deep was good, was real good. And it's a species that most people can't talk on because they're not keeping. Yeah. They haven't worked with them because of the laws. So this was definitely a great episode, and really, really appreciate you coming on, Michael.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me. And you know how to get me. If there's ever anything I can help with down the road, I'm always happy. You just reach out to me anytime.
Yeah. Well, on that note, if people want to talk to you about this stuff, how do you recommend they find you?
Facebook. And they can shoot me a message on Messenger. I'm pretty responsive to that sort of thing. I'll happily answer questions and different things like that. And
for the record, that's how I reached out to you the first time.
Yeah, it works.
Pictures up, and we're like, Ruth and I will be mating, and I will help you through the paperwork. And I was like, check that box.
Yeah. And
So
that's
I'm going to be reaching out about some black pines at this point.
absolutely.
Two
Absolutely.
males aren't going to do anything here, so
No,
let's-
no.
they're just going to stare at each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, let me know, Clint. We'll work something out for sure. And
Absolutely.
I appreciate what you guys are doing, and I think it does a lot of good. And so I'm happy to contribute in any way I can.
Thank
All
you
right.
so much.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you, Max, behind the curtain. So want to give you some props as well. If you want to get a hold of me, you can find me at Zac or Dr. Crawdad on Instagram, Zac Loughman on Facebook. You can also email me. I am about to write up an ad. In fact, that ad will be put up on Texas A&M's job site by the time this drops. We're going to be doing, Dr. Bogan and I at OCIC, we are going to be trying to figure out the metabolic rate of neonate, juvenile, and adult indigo snakes. And I need a grad student to do that. And whoever gets this thesis, you will be working in the animal. There's a lot going on with this one. You're going to be working in the animal collection at West Liberty during the year. We've arranged for you to go down to OCIC for at least a couple months in the summer and work at that facility. And then we're going to be hopefully doing a herp survey of OCIC's grounds, which I'm going to be leading. So whoever gets to do this gets to go herping. So there's herping, keeping indigo snakes, taking care of 400 reptiles at West Liberty University, working with me, and you're probably going to end up in Iowa looking at hognose snakes too. So if you're a snake nerd, you just graduated, you're thinking about grad school, and you made it this far, I definitely, if you were inspired by this episode and you want to do this with your life, hit me up for that grad position, because I want somebody indicative of the three of us to be working on this project. It's too good to just throw a random person on it. So that's my last minute spiel. Clint, where can people find you?
I just have to say it's funny because after all that, we here at Metazotics are looking for some help too, but I can't
There you go.
sell it nearly the way Zac just did. It's
Sorry,
if you
man.
if you want to clean snake poop, if you want to stock shelves, and that's the highlight. I can tell you we have a blast here. I'm fun to work with. I'm really just throwing that in so that all my associates who hear this whenever this episode plays at the store roll their eyes at me. But it was just funny because I'm sitting there thinking we're hiring too, but So if you're looking for me, Clint Bartley on Facebook, Metazotics on Facebook, MetazoticsLLC on Instagram. And please check us out on Metazotics.com, where you can see the hundreds, and as I said earlier, hundreds and hundreds of animals currently available. And you can check us out to see what shows we're going to be vending, because you're around, please come up, introduce yourself. But again, Metazotics.com, and we thank you.
Yeah. So be it morning, afternoon, evening, or night, whatever time of day it is, have a good one. Bye-bye now.